Okay, so we've got this digital cookie jar here that someone submitted for us to take a look at. They sent in Meta's cookie policy. It's not exactly like, beach reading. It's not super fun to just like read through, but we're going to try to help you kind of like decode it and figure out what it all actually means for us.
Yeah, it can definitely be a little bit confusing,
Yeah.
especially if you're not familiar with all the tech jargon and stuff like that.
Exactly. And it's kind of freaky when you realize just how much is being tracked by these little, like, pieces of code. So, like, for starters, can you just break down what a cookie even is?
Sure. Basically, imagine like a tiny little text file that a website will put onto your computer or onto your phone's browser whenever you visit a website.
Oh, okay.
And this little file, it kind of acts like a memory for the site. So it stores little pieces of information about your visit, like maybe what language you prefer to use, what you've put in your shopping cart, or even like your login information.
So it's like a fingerprint, but a digital fingerprint that helps the websites recognize you when you come back.
Yeah, that's actually a really good way to put it.
Okay, cool.
So in Meta's case, they use these cookies for a whole bunch of different reasons,
Yeah.
like some of them. Some of them are meant to keep you logged into your Facebook or Instagram account,
Makes sense.
which obviously is convenient. Others can help to like recover your account if you forget your password.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I've definitely used that before. So, like, cookies can definitely be useful for sure.
Yeah.
But I think the part that always makes me a little bit uneasy is all the tracking stuff. Like, how much are these things actually watching?
Right. Well, it's true that cookies play a big role when it comes to targeted advertising. For example, they have this cookie called the FR cookie, and this one specifically tracks ad performance and basically helps Meta tailor ads to what they think you're interested in. And the crazy part is this cookie lasts for 90 days.
90 days.
Yeah, so that means that little cookie's following you around the internet for like 3 months, gathering information about your browsing habits.
Wow, okay, that feels a little invasive, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's just one cookie. There's also this thing called the Meta Audience Network, which basically extends their reach way beyond just their own platforms.
Wait, so you mean they're tracking me? Even when I'm not on Facebook or Instagram? How does that even work?
So it all comes down to partnerships. Meta partners with all these other websites and apps, and this allows advertisers to use cookies to show you ads across this huge network. So even if you're like reading the news or checking the weather on a completely different app, data collected by Meta's cookies can still be used to tailor the ads that you're seeing.
It's like they're always watching, building this whole profile of everything I'm doing.
Yeah, and it really raises a question about like the trade-offs that we're making when we use all these free online services, you know?
Right. Like, is it really free if we're giving up all this information about ourselves? Okay, so we've talked about why Meta uses cookies, but what about all these, like, different cookie names that are listed in the policy? Like, it's literally like an alphabet soup of Qser, X's, SB, DBLN. What are all these different cookies actually doing?
So each of those has a specific function. Some of them, like Cursor and X's, are focused on authentication, which means they basically help to keep you logged in and personalize your experience across all the different Meta platforms. And get this, those cookies can last for an entire year.
A whole year. I mean, I get the whole, like, staying logged in thing, but
Yeah.
it seems like a long time for a cookie to be just hanging out on my computer.
Yeah. And some of them have even longer lifespans. So, for example, there's the data cookie. It basically gives your browser a unique ID, and it plays a really important role in security. So it helps Meta combat fraud and stuff like that, and it can last for up to 400 days.
400 days.
Yeah.
That's crazy. So we got cookies that track ads, cookies that keep us logged in, cookies that protect our accounts.
Right, and then you have cookies like SB and DBLN. These are also security focused. They help Meta identify your browser securely and basically just protect your account from unauthorized access.
So they're kind of like the security guards of the internet, just like patrolling around looking for anything suspicious. But it sounds like there's a whole other level to this cookie ecosystem.
You're exactly right. We still need to talk about third-party cookies.
Right. Okay, well, let's take a look at that in part 2 of this deep dive into Meta's cookie policy. Stay tuned. So before the break, we were talking about all the different cookies that Meta uses on its own platforms. But you mentioned something about third-party cookies. What does that even mean?
Okay, so basically it means that Meta isn't the only one that's putting cookies in your browser. When you're using their platforms like Facebook or Instagram, they let a whole bunch of other companies do the same thing.
So, like, who are these other companies? Is it, like, small businesses, or are we talking about some big names here?
Oh, you would definitely recognize some of the names. We're talking about companies like Google, Amazon Web Services, even Twitter and Pinterest.
Wow, okay, so Those are some pretty big players. But like, why are all these other companies allowed to use cookies on Meta's platforms?
It's all part of this whole complicated world of data sharing. In online advertising, basically a lot of these third-party cookies are all about tracking what you're doing, not just on Facebook or Instagram, but on all sorts of different websites.
So they're like following me around the internet.
Kind of, yeah. They're
Nice.
gathering information about what you're looking at, what you're clicking on, all that stuff.
And then what? What do they do with all that information?
They use it to build a profile of you, and then they can show you ads that are specifically targeted to your interests.
So even if I'm not directly interacting with these companies, like if I'm not on their website, they can still be collecting data about me.
Exactly.
That's kind of creepy.
It is a little bit unsettling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really makes you think about how much control we actually have over our own data.
Right. It's like everyone's trying to grab a piece of it. And you mentioned that the policy itself even admits that there are limitations.
Yeah.
How much control we actually have.
That's right. Meta does give you some tools to try to manage your data
Yeah.
and your ad preferences. But they also say that controlling what these third-party companies are doing is a lot more complicated.
Okay, so even if I go into my Facebook settings and I like adjust all the privacy stuff, there's still a chance that my data is being used by all these other companies.
Yeah, that's a possibility.
So what can I do? Is there anything I can do to like limit that?
Well, there are a few things you can try. You can go into your ad preferences on Facebook and Instagram and see why they're showing you certain ads. And you can try to change how they're using your data.
So like if I'm tired of seeing ads for cat toys, even though I don't even have a cat, I can tell Meta to stop showing me those ads.
Yeah, you can definitely try that. You can say like, hey, I'm not interested in cat toys. But it's important to remember that these controls aren't perfect. The algorithms that they use to target ads are constantly learning and changing. And those third-party cookies are still out there, gathering information from everything you're doing on the internet.
So it's not like a foolproof solution, but it's worth a shot. What about outside of Facebook and Instagram? Like, is there anything I can do in my browser to manage cookies directly?
Oh, yeah, definitely. That's actually one of the best ways to limit data sharing. Most web browsers will let you either block cookies completely or delete them.
Okay, so I can just go into my browser settings and tell it to, like, block all cookies. Is that all I have to do?
Well, it's not quite that simple
Yeah.
because blocking all cookies can sometimes cause problems.
Problems. Like, what kind of problems?
Well, a lot of websites rely on cookies for things like remembering your login information or keeping track of what you have in your shopping cart.
Yeah.
If you block all cookies, those features might not work properly.
Oh, okay, I see. So it's like a trade-off between privacy and convenience.
Exactly.
So how do you find a good balance?
Well, some browsers have more advanced cookie management features. So, for example, you might be able to block only third-party cookies, which are the ones that are coming from those other companies, while still allowing first-party cookies, which are the ones that come directly from the website you're visiting.
Now, that's interesting. So I could still have, like, the basic functionality, but I could block some of the tracking stuff.
Right.
Are there any other tools or strategies that people can use?
Yeah, you can also try using privacy-focused browser extensions or plugins. These basically act like little bodyguards for your data. They can block third-party trackers and cookies, so you have more control over what information is being collected about you.
That's a cool way to think about it, like little bodyguards for your data. But it seems like with all this stuff, it's like a constant battle. Like the tech companies are always coming up with new ways to track us.
Yeah, it can definitely feel like that sometimes. But the good news is that more and more people are starting to care about data privacy. And we're seeing some new regulations and laws that are designed to give people more control over their data.
That's good to hear. So what are some of the key takeaways from all of this?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that you have choices. You can adjust your privacy settings. You can
Yeah.
manage cookies in your browser. You can use privacy-focused extensions. It's all about being an informed user.
Right. So in part 3 of this deep dive, let's talk more about what all this means for our listeners. Okay, so we've spent like the last 2 parts of this deep dive really like digging into Meta's cookie policy. And, you know, it's crazy how much we just kind of like rely on these little pieces of code without even really thinking about it. Like they help keep us logged in and, you know, personalize our experience, even protect us from like hackers and stuff. But there's also this whole other side to it.
Right, exactly. And that's kind of what we've been talking about this whole time. That
Yeah.
these cookies, especially the ones that come from like third-party companies, can be used to like track what we're doing online and like build these crazy detailed profiles about us and then show us all those super targeted ads
Yeah, and it's kind of creepy sometimes. Like I was reading an article the other day about how some people feel like they're being like followed around the internet by ads for things that they've like literally only just thought about.
Yeah, it's wild, right? Like, these ads can practically read our minds.
Totally. And that's why it's so important to understand how this technology works
Right.
and like what we can do to protect our privacy. Because the good news is we're not totally helpless in this situation. Like we've talked about a few different strategies throughout this deep dive. So let's recap. What are the key takeaways that our listeners should remember?
So first off, it's important to remember that you have choices. You can go into your settings on Facebook and Instagram and try to adjust your ad preferences, although like we said before, those controls aren't perfect. You can also manage cookies directly in your web browser, like you can block third-party cookies completely. Or you can try using some of the more advanced features that some browsers have to give you more control over which cookies you allow.
Right. And don't forget about those privacy-focused browser extensions and plugins. Those can be really helpful too. They're like little bodyguards for your data.
Yeah, exactly.
It's really amazing how much technology is out there
Yeah.
that can help us protect our privacy.
And I think it's really all about taking those small steps to become a more informed and empowered user. Like, read privacy policies when you can. Try to understand how your data is being used. And don't be afraid to, like, play around with different settings and see what works best for you.
That's such a good point. Like, knowledge is power, right?
Definitely.
And the more you know about how all this stuff works, the better equipped you'll be to, like, protect yourself
Yeah.
and make informed decisions about your data.
And it's also important to remember that the digital world is constantly changing. Like, new technologies are always popping up. Companies are updating their policies. So it's an ongoing process. You got to kind of stay curious and keep learning.
So it's like a lifelong journey of learning about data privacy.
Pretty much, yeah.
Well, we've definitely given our listeners a good starting point. Now it's up to them to keep exploring and find what works best for them.
Absolutely.
So for anyone listening who's feeling a little bit overwhelmed by all this talk about cookies and data tracking, just remember this. You have the power to take control. You can start by exploring some of the resources that we've talked about today. And don't be afraid to ask questions. The more you know, the better off you'll be. All right, that's it for this week's deep dive into Meta's cookie policy. Thanks for listening.